Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, joining us our friend Congresswoman Becca Balint, a Democrat representing the entire state of Vermont, the first openly LGBTQ person and woman to represent her home state of Vermont in Congress, served in the House Judiciary Committee and the House Budget Committee. Representative Balint, how are you, my friend?
Dean, I'm doing as well as can be expected in these trying times, but I'm always
Yeah,
happy to talk with you.
it's, there's, when you take a step back and you look at how are we at this place,
Yeah.
it's unnerving a little bit. Adding to that was John Kelly, former chief of staff, retired four-star U.S. Marine Corps general, doing two interviews, one with the Atlantic and one with the New York Times. And in the New
Yes.
York Times, he makes it clear he views Donald Trump as a fascist.
Yes.
And in the Atlantic, it was very jarring. He confirmed conversations that had been reported, but now he confirmed it that Donald Trump said he wanted generals like Hitler
Yes.
and that kind of loyalty. And it really seems when you read the New York Times article, Kelly came forward because Trump's calling fellow Americans the enemy within and threatening to use the military. It's a very dark, disturbing picture that we're
It
getting 2 weeks before the election. What's your
it
reaction?
absolutely is. And so, it was interesting. I got up early to read the Atlantic article because I had seen, bits and pieces of it. It's deeply disturbing. And, my only, I appreciate that he's coming forward. I appreciate that others are coming forward. This needed to happen months ago in this way, because what has happened is that the apologists, right, have been able to make sort of their preemptive, strike on cable news. And you've got people like the Speaker of the House. You've got people like Lindsey Graham and others who will literally dismiss he didn't mean the enemy of within. You're twisting his words. No. And this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. We're talking about the health and the strength of the democracy. And it's chilling. It's absolutely chilling. There's no other way to talk about it. And I think what's so challenging in this moment is that, of course, we don't want political rhetoric that will be about fear-mongering and hatred and division. Of course not. But at some point, like, you do need to say, these are fascist tendencies. What he is saying that's not hyperbole. He has laid it all out for us. And the people closest to him are calling it that. The people on the inside. So it is the whataboutism, right? Of, Democrats are using the word fascist. Like, well, that is exactly the playbook he's using. So how do you draw that distinction between truth and, political rhetoric, right? That is what I think has been challenging for the press too, how to cover it. And I'm curious about how you see that.
I think the corporate media is horrific, but that's a whole different story.
That's right. You're like,
even though I work in the corporate media, there are some great journalists,
right,
but the executives who, in my view, a lot of them are pro Donald Trump because not him personally, but the idea of less taxes, less regulations, more mergers so they can have more, because they really don't like the FTC.
Right. Consolidation.
Right.
Yep.
They want consolidation. Bad for us as consumers, great for business. I think there's a lot of that going on. But, the idea that Donald Trump enemy within, he said it again yesterday at an event in Florida, and the crowd cheered. And that is, to me, the most alarming. And I've told people, when Donald Trump in 2016 called for a total complete shutdown of Muslims coming to America,
right,
it was jarring. But hearing the crowd cheer made it bone chilling. Having his people, he's out there, his closing messages, we're the enemy within. And if he's got to use the military to stop us, and I've got to be honest, few of them will stand up to it.
That's right.
If any, none. They'll apologize for it.
That's, and Dean, this is, you're absolutely right. It is the crowd cheering. It is the apologists making excuses for it. And, I was telling this story last night. I was at an event up in Burlington, Vermont yesterday. And I was telling them about how what it was the most disheartening and jarring thing for me to realize when I started in Congress was the extent to which the Republicans, a lot of the so-called MAGA Republicans in Congress, who talk a good game on TV, and then behind the scenes, they know that this man is unhinged, is dangerous, and they continue to lie to their constituents. They do not have the courage. They choose comfort over courage over and over again. And that should be the rallying cry for people who have any bit of moral courage right now, whether you are an independent or a Republican, and you know what's going on here. The time for silence is so long past.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, I just wrote an article for my Substack, but about John Kelly. And John Kelly understands by coming forward, if Trump wins, he could end up in jail.
Yes.
That's where we are as a nation right now. You literally have to fear that if you come out now and Trump wins, he puts you in jail because this Supreme Court has said he's absolutely immune in his conversations with DOJ.
That's right.
So he can direct him to prosecute anybody he wants for any reason. And not because of the words, they'll find something else, a tax violation, some other crime, anything. That's where we are as a country.
And the folks who continue to prop him up, apologize, obfuscate, they're not going to be the firewall to protect the American people. They're not.
Right.
They have shown us who they are, and they are not willing to stand up to those tendencies. And there are times in the last 2 years when, certainly when we were in the middle of both the battles over the speaker, in the House of Representatives, you talk to these folks offline and they say, well, what do you want us to do? Like, he's going to attack us on Twitter. It's like, oh, I see. I see.
Oh, the bad man. You're a member of Congress. You're one of 435 members in the House. If you're not going to stand up, step aside. That's
exactly. You're in the wrong job then, right? And so I think about you, as a man of color, as a man of Middle Eastern descent, me as a gay woman, like having these people say to us, well, I don't want to get picked on. It's like, oh.
I'm trying to represent Becca Balint. So let's talk about, obviously Vermont, deeply blue state.
Yeah.
But when you talk to people, are they animated Democrats? I mean, certain people in certain states and blue states are calling out to other states. They're doing that kind of phone banking. What totally. Can you share?
Completely animated. And I am hearing, and this is basically I did a barnstorm tour with Bernie on Saturday, traveling across the state. And my message was, we in this moment need to do more than what we've done in the past. And so if you have the financial capacity, you need to be giving more. You need to be giving more to the presidential ticket, and you need to be giving more in House races. That we, like, for me as a member of Congress, I can't do the work of protecting the values that we care about if I don't have enough people in the House of Representatives to do that work. So people are phone banking. We've got a bus going down to Pennsylvania to do door knocking. We've got people who are, my own wife actually just went through a training this weekend. She, every 4 years, she's a poll watcher in New Hampshire, and, because she's an attorney. And so what I continue to tell people is, it is by doing things that we ourselves, when we stretch ourselves beyond what we think is possible for us individually, you inspire other people to do the same thing. And that's what's needed in this moment. And that we don't want to wake up with regrets. You got to leave everything on the field. And that, I think what's been so hard in the way that we've talked about elections the last few cycles is, this is an existential crisis. This is the most important election of your life. Unfortunately, we do continue to come up against these very scary situations. But given the rhetoric and everything that the former president has said, and what J.D. Vance has said, right? Like, you and I think we both know what's happening here, which is they're trying to get this deeply flawed figure, this person who is dissembling before our very eyes, Trump, over the finish line, because they believe he will not be able to serve out 4 years and Vance will be president. That is the end game for them, right? And so we have to do more than we've done in the past. And I've been very excited that, for the most part, folks on the left in Vermont, which is a lot of Vermont, understand that in this moment, they cannot let perfection be the enemy of the good. That we have got to have this discussion about broad policy and have that, those conversations about Medicare for all and making sure we are looking after, the child tax credit, all of those things. But none of that can happen if we do not have an actual, ticket that believes, you have to have a ticket that believes in the Constitution, that believes in the three branches of government. And that's not what we're seeing from the Republican side right now. So I just hope that prevails in the swing states as well, because certainly, there are folks within the left that are going to sit this one out, are not going to vote. And I just think it's so short-sighted. Even when I know it's so painful. I mean, you and I have talked about Israel, Gaza, like it is such a painful, horrible situation. And I know from being in meetings with folks from the Netanyahu government, when I was on congressional trips, they want Trump to win. They want to take back Gaza. They want to, have their way with all of the West Bank. Like, it's so clear. Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, there will be no limits on what they will do. They are emboldened. And so but I understand how hard it is. I do.
But you mentioned Bernie Sanders. I mean, I don't know of everything that Vice President Harris has done. So I can't tell you. I do get 9 million emails a day from the campaign. Do you know if Senator Sanders or AOC has been campaigning with Vice President Harris? And I will say that, look, I understand the Liz Cheney thing. That's a good play. You got to do that. But at the same time, I'm hoping that Bernie's out there for Vice President Harris doing things.
Yes. And actually, I've seen some actually really powerful clips. You mentioned AOC, some really powerful clips in the last few days, really talking about what does it mean when, Trump stands at a McDonald's and essentially in many ways is making fun of, minimum wage workers. And then when asked whether you will increase the minimum wage, he again does not answer the question, right? It's all smoke and mirrors. I know that in speaking with Senator Sanders and others, everybody is just so incredibly anxious about how close the race is, right? Or at least it seems to me. Like, we don't know, right?
We don't know. It's all turnout.
But it just seems to be. And, want to make sure that if Kamala Harris is elected, that we continue to have an administration that is deeply committed to preserving unions, building upon that, making sure that we're listening to this moment in history, this second Gilded Age, that the income inequality is not the cause of Trumpism, but it certainly helped to create an environment in which it took hold, right? That it gave a permission structure around the economics to then be more sexist and more racist and more homophobic and more Islamophobic, all of these things. And so that is, the case also that I'm making when I talk to folks in my base as well. Look, we can't sit this one out, even if you feel like, she's not saying things in exactly the way you want her to. She doesn't have to campaign in the style that Vermonters needed to campaign in. She needs to be able to move the needle in those battleground states, because we have this horrible thing called the Electoral College, which is, another conversation entirely. Yeah.
It's funny. You mentioned the Gilded Age, and we talked about it last time, but I'm reading a book called Iron Empires about robber barons, railroads, and the making of America. And it's all about Vanderbilt and J. Pierpont Morgan and what they did with the railroads and the amount of money and how obscene and corrupt it was. And you look at Elon Musk and you can't help it. You see the other billionaires giving, Miriam Adelson giving $100 million to buy the West Bank, apparently, essentially. And others. It's not just her, it's all of them. Like, they all have their agenda there. And Trump is the most transactional guy. He's got no morals, no code. Right. And so he's like, sure, I'll take your money. And he told the oil tycoons, give me $1 billion, you can write your own climate change policy. There won't be climate change policy, just whatever you want.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
This is the guy. So what would be the impact if Trump were to win? What would the impact on the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, well, it's just so clear. Again, like, at this point, we don't have any idea what he stands for except for himself, right? That, if you look back over the history of this guy and his identification with a political party or with policies, it just blows in the wind, right? Depending on who seems to be in front of him. We do know, back to my point earlier about JD Vance, like JD Vance is completely and totally in bed with the Heritage Foundation. We know that. And we know that Project 2025 is it's the roadmap, right? And so if you look at, it's a huge document, and it's amazing that they put it all in writing, but they want to roll back protections for LGBTQ Americans in the workplace. They want to go after, teachers who are, quote unquote, like using their classrooms to groom kids into being, whether it is gay people, people who identify as gay or trans. And of course, this is absolutely absurd, but they have used this. So the people that I serve with in Congress have used this as a way to scapegoat an entire group of people, right, and their parents,
right.
And that's bad. And then also underpinning that is the roadmap in Project 2025 that is saying we're going to go after these teachers, right? We're going to make it so that, again, back to your point about who are the enemies within. Like, they have spent the last 2 years saying teachers are the enemy within. And that includes trying to create classrooms where every child feels supported and where they can learn. That's what we're talking about here. So yeah, I'm very worried about that. Certainly incredibly concerned about what it will mean for reproductive rights and making sure that we all have the ability to have control over our own bodies. And it's a piece that I always want to mention here, because they do this dance. And I had it in my own debates that I had with my opponent in the last few weeks. They do this dance around, oh no, we're not going to have a national abortion ban. That's not going to go through, all this stuff. Well, first of all, I don't believe that's true. I believe they will try. And they don't need to pass a national abortion ban. What they want to do is use the Comstock laws to make it illegal to mail mifepristone. That would essentially make it incredibly difficult for women across this country to get the health care that they need. So it's diabolical.
Right.
It's diabolical.
Yeah. I mean, I could see them defunding, not giving funding to states that allow abortion.
Absolutely.
The way they do with in a good way, the Highway Act years ago to get the speed limit down.
Yeah.
Right. And so the same thing here. They'll say, well, if they're having abortions, no federal funding, you defund the blue states. And that really could lead to some ugly stuff where blue states are like, we're not going to give you our tax dollars anymore. Like,
right.
This is really, we're on a path. It's like an 1860 election on a certain way. It really has, I don't know what the 1860 election felt like, but reading a lot about it, it really is, it's not policy differences, it's stark visions of a nation going forward. What's your reaction? Trump they're leaning into a lot of anti-transgender ads now. They're rolling it out all over the place. Ted Cruz, who's neck and neck with Colin Allred, but Donald Trump is. What's your reaction to that? And how painful is that, especially for transgender teens, to see this?
Yeah, it's painful for transgender teens and their parents in particular. So look, it is no accident that this is the issue that they've seized upon. This was a strategic choice that they made ahead of this Congress to figure out, well, so, okay, largely the nation has moved on from same-sex marriage. Most people have been to a lesbian wedding, right? Like, it's just, it's a reality, right? And so clearly, in some ways, of course, I'm being a little bit silly. There's still plenty of homophobia, but they realized it was not an issue that would drive people's fear. And they basically had a brainstorm session, and the Washington Post did a really good expose of this. And they said, oh, it's trans Americans. That's trans kids.
Yep.
We can activate our base on spreading all kinds of disinformation about the dangers of, kids, trans kids, right? And so you see this in the latest, horrible rhetoric from the Trump campaign saying, oh, you can send your kid to school as a boy, and that he has a gender reassignment surgery at school, and he comes home a girl, right? Like, this is patently, like, absurd and outrageous. And you do not see, back to my point, you do not see members of Congress rebutting this. In fact, they are using it to once again attack other Americans. And I hope that people will see through the cruelty. That's what it is. And that was one thing that I thought was very salient about what Liz Cheney said in her campaign stops with Kamala Harris the other day. She was like, it's the cruelty. The cruelty is the point. Yeah. And so, and actually I was texting with some friends of mine who are in battleground states or who are frontliners. And they were saying, they're seeing a lot more of that in their races. And honestly, this is not what most parents are concerned about, right? They want safe schools. They want guns out of schools. They want to make sure that schools are, safe places for kids to be. But it is that age-old pick a person or a group to blame, to scapegoat, and it's just disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. And it goes back to, I would like my colleagues to choose some courage over comfort in these moments, because those parents of those kids, they're watching the way that you're talking about their families. And I don't know if you and I talked about this, but we had one of the most disgusting hearings we ever had in judiciary, was led by Mike Johnson before he became speaker. And it was all about attacking trans Americans. That was the entire hearing. Okay. And we, as the minority, we were able to invite one or two witnesses. And one of the witnesses we invited was a Republican, a Christian conservative Republican woman who was the mom of a trans kid. And she stood there, sat there at the table and said, we are talking about my child and my parenting. And this is not some political agenda that I have. I am one of you. I am a Republican. Right. I'm a conservative. This is about supporting my child. And she was just, by the end of the hearing, she was just so beside herself with what her party has become on this issue. Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the Netflix documentary, Will and Harper, with Will Ferrell and Harper Steele. I know Harper. I used to work Saturday Night Live. I knew Harper before she transitioned.
Yes.
And she transitioned at 60. And I'm like, you picked the worst time to transition. I'm like, what were you thinking? That kind of, but I know, Harper
it's an amazing,
for many years.
It's an amazing film.
Well, when I knew I worked on production staff, and Harper was a writer and did not transition, and there was nothing you would never guess in the world, because, Harper was a dude from Iowa, like everything about it was just like, and flannel and dressed horrible and was sloppy. I'm like, what were you doing? Was this all camouflage? And but she made a great point in the documentary that before the transition had questions about dark thoughts, about self-harm and stuff. But now all she wants to do is live. And that was such a great moment. The idea that, you go through this tough time, and of course, transitioning at like 61, but she did like 60, it's like, you miss certain things in life, sure, but so much happier now.
Yeah.
So I was recently had Harper on, but I know Harper for years. We kept in touch, and then not so anything. Then a couple of years ago, and I saw this documentary. I was at Sundance actually for something else, and the documentary was there. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So I reached out.
Yes, that's how you make a change in culture. Is movies like that, right?
Yeah.
It's those intimate portrayals. That's certainly how we were able to get marriage equality in Vermont. It was about conversations with neighbors about, my marriage or my connection to my spouse is not going to in any way threaten your marriage, your identity, your, experience in your community. And I actually think that film is going to be one that changes a lot of minds. It's such an intimate portrayal of someone just wanting to live, just wanting to be themselves. Isn't that what we all want, right?
I said, Harper, do you have your Oscar gown ready? Because you're going. And she's like, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because she's a comedian. He goes, here's my speech, though. I want to read it to you. Like, she already has the Oscar acceptance speech ready. So last thing here in our last minute, the winning the House is so vitally important.
Yes.
So what are the prospects? How are the Democrats feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I am. I'm feeling optimistic. We know based on some of the, certainly we're watching very closely all of those states that have early in-person voting. And look, we're not taking anything for granted this time. Like, we are playing in races that we didn't know that we would be competitive in. I've done a lot of work raising money for red to blue candidates. So, I don't want to speak too much lingo. So those districts that are Republican that we're trying to flip to Democratic. And I feel like reproductive rights absolutely is a big one. And that is, that's the thing. Republicans, they don't understand that this cuts across political line. Like, yes, you've got your some extremist fundamentalists who do not want to have any women to have any say over what happens to their bodies, but that's not where most Americans are. It's just not. Right. And so we know that is absolutely going to continue to drive people to the polls. And the Republicans in the House have no record to run on. They literally have achieved nothing, right?
And they're proud of it.
It has been the least productive Congress in modern history. And so what are they running on? Nothing. They got nothing. And so, I do think, we are running through the tape, right? we're not taking anything for granted. And I know my friends who are in those battleground districts, they are working night and day trying to knock on every door, turn out every voter.
Right.
And goes back to my original pitch at the top of this interview. We got to do more than we've done in the past because the stakes are just so high, for all of us. Yeah.
Very much so. Well, Representative Balint, great chatting with you. Less than 2 weeks from the election. I look forward to chatting with you on the other side, and hopefully we'll be celebrating and joyful about it. So
exactly. Thank you so much, Dean. I love talking with you.
Me too.